Welcome to True Diversity Film Series, Standing in Solidarity. My name is Donna Walker-Kuhn, and I'm Senior Advisor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at New Jersey Performing Arts Center. In celebration of Women's History Month, we will discuss the power of women, the inroads we've made, and what's yet to come. And I hope you were able to watch the powerful Emmy-nominated PBS documentary, Film Not Done, Women Remaking America, and we provided the link when you registered for the panel this evening. We're especially excited for this panel because women at NJPAC are co-presenting our panel this evening. Women have always had a seat at the table at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, something demanded by our 9 founders more than 25 years ago. Today, Women at NJPAC is a dynamic and diverse community of women who seek to build community, strengthen connections, and continue our historic support of the arts at NJPAC. We're thrilled to welcome 4 groundbreaking women leaders who will share their perspectives, expertise, and recommendations on what each of us can do to be an advocate for advancing and empowering women. This social justice series is part of our Standing in Solidarity initiative in NJPAC. The purpose of the series is to bring the community together and to encourage everyone to take part in the movement to ensure civil rights for all. On our website, you'll find archived prior social justice panel discussions, as well as resources that will help you take action. We're also happy to have as our advisors the Newark NAACP, New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, Newark Arts, the Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Center at Rutgers University-Newark, and the Africana Institute at Essex County College. Now, NJPAC would like to offer a land acknowledgement. And the language we are using was created with consultation and guidance from Chief Dwayne Perry of the Ramapo Lenape-Munsee tribe and Oleana Whispering Dove of the Eastern Salagi Algonquin descendants. And we are grateful to them for their generosity, wisdom, and labor to craft these words. We, the Lenape, original benefactors of land, once ripened and cultivated with attentiveness to the Creator and her ascendancy, express everlasting gratitude to our Creator for the traditional, ancestral jurisdictions of the Munsee, Esopus, Canarsie, Capsea, Werpos, Silanoy, and Weekasqueak, jointly known today as the Ramapo and Nanticoke Lenni Lenape. We are the Lenni Hoking today and will be for the remaining days of tomorrow, keepers of the past. Let this moment of recognition be a monument of action. Let it be the beginning of hope for this, our Turtle Island, and for the Ramapo Lenape, the Munsee people of whose land we now trod. Here on this land, in the place of the Munsee, we acknowledge our debt to those who've come before us, to those who've been denigrated and suffered for the sake of cultural and land appropriation. Let this, our land acknowledgement, be the beginning of our return to unity. Let us be guardians of the water, the air, and the earth, the four-legged, the flyers, the swimmers, the crawlers, the mammal people, and the green. Let us now stand lifting our humanity and rapturing with Earth's consciousness as guardians of harmony and kindness. Before I introduce our moderator, I'd like us to take a look at the trailer of the film, Not Done, Women Remaking America. It will help set the stage for our discussion. Thank you.
I didn't know that I was going to be the opening speaker at the march in Washington, D.C. I don't think anybody knew what we were walking into other than the feeling that it was necessary and we had to be there.
I see this as a moment of taking feminism back, making feminism a project that all of us can share.
Black Lives Won! Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Won!
When I put the hashtag in front of Black Lives Matter, I was like, we're gonna make this thing go viral.
I still remember the exact moment when we hit the publish button.
We kind of watched with wonder as the story started to take off like wildfire.
Everybody's like, oh, good, look, now we have a movement. And I'm like, nah, Me Too is a tiny part of a large movement that's been happening for decades.
I got a call saying, a bunch of us are gonna gather. Do you wanna come over and join us? I said yes, because I was mad.
This was before we even had the name Time's Up.
Someone may have slammed their hand on the table and said, time's up on all of this behavior. And then it was like, oh, that's our name.
There's a renaissance that's happening inside of Hollywood.
I remember calling my attorney and saying, like, if I say this, are we sure that it's true? On behalf of women everywhere, I will brag. I am the highest paid showrunner in television.
The United States Congress certainly was not built for young women, but it's really young women of color who have pushed forward for so many changes, and that has just turned the power dynamics here on Capitol Hill on its head.
The world and this country is changing. It's been changed. And I think that we have an opportunity this time to do it right.
There are some people who think that we are post-civil rights, we are post-feminism, and therefore we're post-intersectional. I can't see how we're post anything, and I can't see how we can possibly think we're done.
Thank you. Dr. Melissa Cooper is an associate professor in the history department at Rutgers University-Newark. Dr. Cooper specializes in African-American cultural and intellectual history and the history of the African diaspora. She's an author of Making Gullah, a history of Sapelo Islanders, race, and the American imagination, an intellectual and cultural history that examines the emergence of the Gullah and scholarly and popular works during the 1920s and the 1930s. Dr. Cooper received the Rutgers Newark Board of Trustees Award for Excellence in Research in 2021, which honors tenured faculty members who have made distinguished research contributions to their discipline and/or society at large. And she earned her PhD in history from Rutgers University. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Cooper as our moderator for this evening. Welcome.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you. It's really great to be here. Good evening to our panelists and to our audience. I've really been looking forward to this conversation about the film Not Done. We should probably begin with introductions. Our first panelist, Adriana Pacheco, is a film editor of Not Done and other documentaries, including Soul of a Nation, Philly DA, and The Black Church. This is our story, this is our song. And has collaborated with award-winning directors and executive producers, including Henry Louis Gates Jr. and Dylan McGee. Paulette Brown, our next panelist, is the first woman of color president of the American Bar Association and current chair of the board of New Jersey Institute of Social Justice. Paulette is also a past president of the National Bar Association and a retired partner and chief diversity and inclusion officer at Locke Lord LLP. Our next panelist, Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill, is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, former Navy pilot, and former assistant U.S. attorney, and has represented New Jersey's 11th Congressional District since she was elected in 2018. Welcome to all of our panelists. Feel free to turn your cameras on. There is so much that I can say, so much more that I can say about you and your work. I think it would be better if I give you an opportunity to perhaps add something to the bio that I just shared with the audience, and or tell the audience what your hopes are in terms of this conversation, what you hope the takeaway will be at the conclusion of our talk.
Okay, I'll start. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And Dr. Cooper, I just realized that I actually work on a documentary where you were part of the people that we interviewed. So I'm honored to have you being the moderator for this panelist. There's a few things I'd like to add to my bio. The first one is I am originally from Colombia, from Bogota. I've been living in the United States for 30 years. And I feel like as an editor, this gives me a different perspective in how to tell stories. So as an editor, you come to the table with at everything, in everything you do, with your history, and your history determines how you see the world. So I feel like being an immigrant has been a huge positive in my experience as an editor. Regarding the movie, I hope everyone enjoyed it. I had a blast working on it, and we had so many subjects that we unfortunately didn't have enough time to really portray in the movie. But I hope that from what you see, you can see that actual change is made on the ground, and is made by women like the Congresswoman who decides to do something and runs for office. So like most of the changes that happen in the movie are happening from people that are really just in our local communities trying to change the world. So I hope that that people were really appreciative of that. And I look forward to a conversation about the movie and the stories in it. Thank you.
I suppose I'm next. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening with you, Dr. Cooper, NJPAC, and these fabulous panelists. I don't even know how I got to be participating with them, but I am very pleased and honored to be here. A couple of things about me. In addition to being the first woman of color to be president of the APA, I was also in line to be the first person of color, period, in the 140 years of the labor and employment section of the state bar. I was asked to step aside or they said that they would deter my chairpersonship. And I'm like, no. And so I simultaneously served as chair of the labor and employment section of the New Jersey State Bar and as president of the American Bar Association. And, one of the other things that I'm super proud of is that when I was president of the National Bar Association, I had an opportunity to lead a delegation to monitor the first free and democratic elections when Nelson Mandela was elected president of South Africa. And beyond that, you mentioned that I was served as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. So it has been said about me that if you slit my wrist rather than blood coming out, little DEIs would come out for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am a strong and serious advocate, especially around the issues of equity. And so the thing that I would like to this audience to think about when they leave is that with all that has been shown in the film, Adriana, thank you so much, about different aspects of a movement and the movement in general, that we should think about the fact that equity has not truly been achieved, that we've all been given some tools. How are we going to use those tools to make a more equitable society for not just women, but women of color, and understand that there is no monolith among all of them? Thank you.
So it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much, Dr. Cooper, for moderating this. Wow, what a wonderful documentary, and so timely. I have to say, I think many of us have just been coming to terms. I don't think a lot of us thought that our work was done as women, but we thought that we were constantly going to be moving forward. We were constantly going to be making progress. This is the first time in my life that it feels like we're really rolling back progress. So to see that film and all of the women fighting in the sisterhood was actually very uplifting for me. So thank you for your work on that. And then Ms. Brown, wonderful to be here with you. The New Jersey Institute of Social Justice is simply a fantastic organization. I can't say enough good things. I worked closely with the Institute when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office working on issues of criminal justice reform and starting our first federal prisoner reentry court. The one thing I would like people who listen to this today to walk away from this with is the idea that representation matters. And in our diverse society, diverse representation matters. And I can speak to that from my own corner as coming into Congress in that class of 2018 with more women and what that meant. But I do think on so many levels, it is having women's voices at the table that really makes the difference in understanding this complicated narrative and understanding what is impacting progress forward in this nation. So thank you so much for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you all. Let's dive in. Adriana, why don't we start by you sharing, just give us a little synopsis of the film, a brief synopsis of Not Done.
Of course. Okay, for whoever didn't have a chance to see it, you can still watch it, I hope, after the panel. But so Not Done, Women Remaking America, it's part of a series that was made by the Maker franchise. The Makers franchise, it was a series of different videos about women trailblazers. So women that, first doing this, first doing that, and it changed, and it went through the history of the women's movement up until 2016. That was the last time that one of the movies was made. So in this latest one, we try to tell the story of what happened between 2016 and 2020. And so basically it deals with the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement, the Women's March, the election of Donald Trump, and how every one of these movements have been how do you say that? How they have been pursued mostly by women of color, and how they have been in the background and in the trenches fighting for equality in their different movements. So that's mostly what the movie is about. I don't know if you want me to go into more specific details of each of the sections, or just let me know.
Yeah, I think that it's so important that you pointed out that this movie has a really unique vantage point. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the production and thinking about storytelling, right? Why does the storyteller matter? In my field, the long history of producing historical knowledge has revealed that there is a relationship between the researcher, their vantage point, the questions that they ask, the stories about the past that they pursue. And in my own work, I'm always very interested in the relationship between the storyteller and the story that's being told. So what happens when we put women, right? When women are placed in the seat of the storyteller in filmmaking, and in the making of this film in particular?
Okay, so first of all, that is like a wonderful observation and question. So first of all, this movie was made by 99.9% women or people identifying as women. So that was one of the things that our executive producer and our director and our producers were very keen on, because in order to really try to tell the stories of the women's movement, we need women to tell them, but not only white women. We needed all kind of women. We needed Black women, Muslim women, all kind of people. Because what happens is, throughout history, the stories that we hear and the stories that we learn in school and everywhere have been told by white men. So what happens with that is that only their experience, their lived experience is being told. And all these nuances and all these other experiences of minorities are being left aside. So it is very important to have at the helm of movies, television shows, Congress, everywhere, just having women to be able to say, hey, from this point, from my side of the street, we see things this way. We don't see them the way that you see them. And why do we see them this way? Because this is our experience. And that is something that is very important in order to make change. I feel like it's a way to really understand where the other one is coming from. And if what we're learning and what we're hearing is always coming from one point of view, all the other points of view are lost and misunderstood. So it's basically in order to be able to tell this particular story, which was about the women's movement and how women have created all this different progress. What happened was, it's like, yeah, we could have chosen to do only white women, but like in the movie, you see that women within themselves have many different needs. The needs of an immigrant woman are not the same as the needs of a white woman or a Black woman. And what happens was, like, in the past, a lot of the focus, for lack of a better word, for the women's movement was in abortion, right? And at some point, which is a very important point, but for Black women, it was like, I want my son to be safe. That's a more important issue for me than abortion. And so how, as community, as women, how do we handle all these differences? How can we support each other? How can we be intersectional and help each other and understand that what my experience affects the other one? But we need to be able to talk about it and not only say, okay, this is the way history goes. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think that the documentary creators, producers were so intentional is really evident. You can see the imprint of everything that you described in the documentary. Not Done is a really powerful exploration of this new wave of the women's movement that's taken shape over the last 5 years or so. One important episode of this new wave of the women's movement explored in the film was the record-breaking and history-making number of women who ran for office and were elected to a host of government positions. Most notably, women voted into Congress in 2018. So Congresswoman Cheryl, talk about this moment. The symbolism of this moment was surely breathtaking, right? And I do believe that representation is important, but tell us what it means to move from the symbolic to action, right? Discuss the promise inherent in the new group of women who've entered Congress and state houses and local offices all over the country in terms of the potential to change policy in the way that government serves women and the issues that matter most to women.
Sure. It was a very exciting time, as you can see from the film, that hope in the aftermath of Trump coming into office and all that he represented in rolling back protections for women and so many other people across the nation. And to have that Women's March, to have that sort of repudiation that our voices didn't matter. And then to have the women coming into Congress was a very exhilarating time and so incredibly important, I would say, for two reasons. The first reason, it kind of harkens back to my time when I was serving in the military. And I remember when I was still in college as a midshipman being sent onto a ship, and there were very few women on this. It was an aircraft carrier. When the air wing is deployed, there are 5,000 people aboard an aircraft carrier, as it was at that time. And at one point, I was the only woman on that ship for a couple of weeks in the middle there as two groups of people moved on and off. But when I first got on there, I was with a group of ROTC midshipmen, and we were talking. And I was hanging out with two women in particular. Our paths were kind of crossing there, and there weren't very many other women. And they happened to be two Black women. And we were all discussing how this one senior officer had said, it doesn't matter who your senior officer is, if they're Black, white, man, woman, that good leadership is good leadership. And you can emulate that person, follow that person. And the three of us, I still remember this conversation, could not have thought that that was further from the truth. I mean, I certainly saw some good leaders, but I'm not going to take the bald, cigar smoking, tobacco chewing, swearing in ways that at that time in my life, I had to ask people to translate. I was not going to emulate that person. I could follow them. I could think they were a very good leader, but I was not going to emulate them. And furthermore, when I came across certain problems, they were not going to be able to give me the best way to handle it because it was something just completely outside of their experience. Even if they had sympathy, they certainly weren't going to have empathy for my situation or understand how to tell me how to best navigate it. And so when I think about having representation, I think about all the little girls who look up and see, certainly this is open to me. Look, that person's doing it. And not just one, we have this critical mass of people. And I'll tell you, when the vice president came to my district to go see young girls, in Head Start programs, really young girls, just the way their eyes lit up, I could tell these were conversations that they were having with their parents about, that if you're a Black woman, you could be the vice president of the United States. If you're a South Asian woman, you could be president of the United States, and how important those conversations were, even from a very young age, to see that modeled. So that's one part that's really important. But then there's the other part that's equally important, and that's the base of the job of a legislature, and that's putting policy into action. And there's that phrase, if anyone followed Hillary Clinton's campaign or some of the 2018 campaigns, you remember that phrase that we often use. If you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. We say that, and we kind of in some sort of gut way understand that to be true. But I can tell you that there are some very brass tacks way that is true as you're a legislator. And one of the first times that came up for me, I sit on the House Armed Services Committee, and we were passing the National Defense Authorization Act. And something that had been really depressing to me, I had been out of the national defense space for a while. I'd left the military and gone into criminal justice. So I'd been out of that space, but to come back into that space and find that for women, the rates of sexual assault and sexual harassment had not markedly changed since I had been at the Naval Academy decades before. And the stories that I was being told were the same stories that friends were telling me when I served in the military decades ago, was really depressing. So I thought that it was very important to take sexual assault and sexual harassment out of the chain of command. Because here's how sexual assault and sexual harassment have been handled in the military. You're in a squadron, a flight squadron, and you have a rank system, and you're supposed to follow the orders of those appointed over you. You can see how young, vulnerable women can sometimes be vulnerable to people who use their position of authority over them. And yet those senior people are often good friends with the commanding officer of the squadron. They've known each other for years. They've served overseas together. Their spouses know each other. And your commanding officer sees him with his daughters, right? We saw, for those of you who saw AOC testify about being someone's daughter, it's so powerful because that's always they choose, oh, I have daughters, so I would never. So the commanding officer of the squadron saying, oh my gosh, he's so great with his daughters, he would never harass someone. And then you can imagine the young enlisted person. And maybe she looks different. Maybe she has a lot of piercings or a lot of tattoos. Maybe she's not in the vision of what the commanding officer would think a professional person in the military would be. And she comes forward and says, this guy, this friend of yours who you think is so awesome, just sexually assaulted me. And then you're going to ask that commanding officer to decide the case. Imagine, he couldn't even sit on a jury in a case like that, but he's deciding the case. So I thought it was really important to get sexual assault and harassment out of the chain of command. And in the 2019 NDAA, all we asked for was a study. We just said, let's take it out of the chain of command at our service academies only, and let's study it and see if it works. And some of the Republicans said, no, we just, we still need to look at this. We're not sure we even want to take it out of the chain of command in those service academies. And so they said it was a bad idea. And so I stood up in that meeting and I said, I went to the Naval Academy and I'm telling you how it looks. And I am now sending young women to these service academies. And you cannot ask me to simply sit by while this continues to happen. And then they spoke against it again. And then Elaine Luria, who came into my class as well, and who also attended the Naval Academy, spoke up about just how it looks in the military. And we got the most amount of Republicans to cross over and vote with us in that year. It failed in the Senate, but I can tell you in this year's NDA, not only did we get it out of the chain of command in our service academies, but we got it out of the chain of command service-wide. So that's the power of representation. That's what it means to have those voices of experience at the table to say, no, this is what my lived experience is. This is what it actually looks like and what you're asking of us right now. So I think that's really powerful.
Thank you. I mean, you really have me thinking about and wondering about what other policy changes you see on the horizon that give you hope that the movement will continue to sort of have an impact in this way.
Well, I think that's a great point, because in a not so positive vein, something that I was reminded of as I was starting, to run in 2018, and it started to be called the Year of the Woman in 2018. I called someone to ask them to support me and how important it was to have women. And she said, well, I'm going to support you. But, this isn't the first year of the woman. The first year of the woman was when Anita Hill testified, and we got women in. And she goes, and that didn't last very long. So I took that as a challenge, not just to have 2018 be the year of the woman, but to carry this momentum forward. And I think, so the way you phrased it, Dr. Cooper, I think is so important. How are we going to carry it forward? And one of the areas, and again, I'm a mom of 4 kids, and I've always been working. And so childcare has been just such a debacle in this country. I mean, it's just, I'm sure you could hear story after story after story. And yet, when I saw childcare coming up, we have fallen so far behind. 20 years ago, we were the best for working women, and we have fallen so far behind even our allies in the face of childcare. And now we have over half the states in the nation, center-based infant care is more expensive than in-state college tuition. I mean, it is shocking. And imagine what that does to so many women who are trying to decide, do I stay in the workforce? Do I drop out? How am I even going to make enough money to support my family if I'm a single mom and I have to pay this much for childcare? What is that going to do to my finances? And then we saw it was even worse during COVID. The rates of women, we still have only about 700,000 women returning and 1.4 million men. So you can see how that hit has occurred to our women returning to the workforce. And a lot of that's because of childcare. So what's so exciting to me is I sit on the Education and Labor Committee as well, and childcare came up, and we were hoping to pass it and Build Back Better. And I'll tell you, when it came up, it was well-intentioned. There was a bill that came forward, and all the women on the committee were basically like, this isn't going to work. This simply isn't good enough. And I'm telling you, every single woman on the Education and Labor Committee, and we sort of span the gamut of, on the Democratic side, we sort of have a diverse array of opinions in areas that we're from and districts we represent, but we were all united in saying, no, this isn't good enough in the face of pressure from the White House to back down, in the face of pressure from leadership. Every woman on the Ed and Labor Committee stood up and said, no, we need to do better. And I can tell you the reason, even though we haven't gotten that passed yet, the conversations we started, I think are going to give us the momentum to get this done. The engagement on that issue, I think we saw from every corner. It matters to poor women. It matters to middle-class working women. It matters to parents. I mean, this is one of the critical ways where we address real injustice in the face of, quite frankly, women in the workforce. And I think now that we know women are over half the workforce, and we know that many of those women are single moms, this is going to be something that I think we can get done moving forward. And we've really corralled some of the resources. So I'm excited about that.
And that definitely is exciting. Wishing you much success, right? And you make a really important case for the power of representation. And it's certainly a theme that emerges in the documentary. What does it mean to have representation and to be in those places and be at the forefront of making decisions that can actually impact people's lives? So Paulette, I'm thinking about your experiences as a trailblazer in terms of representation. Can you talk to us both about your experience and talk to us about Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, you know, a woman of enormous judicial and legal stature, and her history-making nomination to the Supreme Court? How should we understand the significance of the first Black woman nominated to the Supreme Court, especially in light of this conversation about representation?
So I'd rather talk about her than me, but one of the things, you know, I'd like to say to Congressman Cheryl is that, you know, not only do we have to be at the table, but we have to be there before the main course is served. We can't arrive at dessert. You know, otherwise we will have just zero input to begin with. So, you know, and the other thing I forgot to point out, when you mentioned the Institute, I was so embarrassed because I did not mention that I'm the first woman to ever chair the board of the Institute. And so we'll see how that goes in a little while. But, you know, just a little bit, you know, some of the things that I saw today, I watched the first day of the hearings, my eyes were glued to the television. Two things that I noticed, one, and they talked about it, is that look that she had to have when people were saying all sorts of really strange things, sometimes really bizarre things. And it's that look that you have to have kind of at all times. And that's what I experienced when you really wish to say things. And sometimes in my case, you know, she's probably more restrained than I am because I had a reputation of what comes up, comes out. But, you know, to have that look all of the time to show that you are not angry, that you are not upset about strange things that people are saying to you and also all around you. And also to have people, no matter how well qualified, no matter what your credentials are, that people are going to question you. You know, I feel sometimes as a Black woman that it is never enough. You have to do more. You have to prove yourself over and over and over again. I could never compare myself to Judge Brown Jackson and the stature that she has and the process that she's going through. But I can tell you that whether we choose to be role models, we are. And I think that Congresswoman Cheryl, you talked about when the Vice President came. You know, it was important to me because we don't choose to be these role models, but we have a duty that once we are in these roles that we must be, because there's so many children who have to see things to believe that they can be things. And if they don't see it, they may not believe it. And I know that is personally true for me because I grew up, you know, segregated schools until 10th grade. I didn't know anything about what I could be. Didn't decide that I was going to be a lawyer. I was in college. And so I was not one of these ones that in the 4th grade, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. None of that. But I think that with Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, she is, in my time, I have never seen anyone more qualified to serve on the United States Supreme Court. And yet she is having to go through these gymnastics. And I don't think that would necessarily be the case. And we know it wouldn't be the case because we've seen other people come through the process. I know some of it has to do with politics. And some people are saying that, you know, it does not have anything to do with race or whatever. But, there are a multitude of complexities when it comes to Black women in particular. If you look at all of the things that impact, when we talk about equal pay, we talked about equal pay day. That did not apply to Black women. Ours does not come until August. And with respect to how she would rule, in addition to her excellent credentials, all the various roles that she's held, she brings a different perspective because of her layers of complexity that no one else can bring to bear to the bench. Not just all of her different experiences as public defender, as clerk, as a trial judge, as an appellate judge, but by virtue of the fact that she is a Black woman and what she has been subjected to all of her life and having to prove herself again and again and again, even if she does not talk about it, we know it to be true. People who look like us know it to be true, and that it does not necessarily happen for other people, even if we don't speak about it. And sometimes we know we can't speak about it. And so I think that, people don't have a full appreciation of that. And people don't understand how they minimize you when they ask you certain questions like, what was your LSAT score when you were on Harvard Law Review? They would not ask those kinds of questions of others. Certainly they didn't ask it to the last female who was confirmed, and her credentials were far less superior than Judge Brown Jackson. And I think that even in the minimization, when I looked at the hearings, and Professor Lisa Fairfax, when she was starting to introduce Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, people went to commercial break, or they paused for other reasons in the program. And I'm like, what is this? And I switched to different stations, and it was happening on all the stations. That when they got to her, that's when they chose to take a station break. And so it's further minimalization, in my opinion, maybe unconscious, but it is nevertheless minimalization. And it is a downplay of the capabilities that she have to have. And it's a deterrent from looking at what is actually there and what it is that she brings to the table. And it's more than anybody else has ever brought to the table. And I'm sorry to be raising my voice, but I can't help it.
No, and I think that you really, you raise an issue that was definitely touched on in the film, that we need to think about how different women's experiences, right, influence the ways that they have to fight for freedom, for justice, for equality. And Adriana, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that. Like, one of the things that the documentary reveals is that as women at the forefront of this new wave of the movement work to dismantle the structures of oppression and all of the disparities and traumas that it creates, they also had to contend with and struggle through the ways that these structures pose real challenges in terms of broad coalition building. One example being tensions between white and Black women, but there are others. Can you tell us more about how this was explored in the film?
Absolutely, yes. Mostly what we, for example, with the Women's March, it was clear in the documentary how there were different coalitions that had different interests at hand, and how the white and the Black women specifically had different issues that they wanted to address. But besides that, we were also very conscious about how we wanted Muslim women to be included, and how we wanted it to be intersectional in that sense, and especially in the Women's March. The same thing happens with Time's Up, when we have the women of Hollywood that are like, moving and organizing in order to equal pay for women, and also in the issue of sexual harassment that it actually comes from the Me Too. But how the agricultural workers were a very important part for them in the Time's Up movement to understand that women, it doesn't really matter if in which position sometimes you are, but people want to quiet us, right? So they will tell the people, that the Hollywood actresses, oh, you know what, you're so privileged. Why are you complaining? Just be quiet. And then they're telling the agricultural workers, you're so insignificant. We can replace you in 1 minute. Why are you complaining? And it's especially that we were trying to address, like how by being intersectional and how by like putting together just the fact of being in the same room, women with different experiences, we were able to change the discourse in that sense. And so in the making of the movie, our executive producer, Dylan McGee, she was very, very, very forceful, and she wanted people from all kinds of backgrounds in the crew. So, our DP is of a Muslim background, and it was great. She brought it, and when we show cuts, because before we finish the movie, usually you send rough cuts and whatever to the crew to get feedback and see, is this clear? Is this not clear? We got great feedback from her, and some feedback that only she could have given because she was the only Muslim in our team. So that's all the kind of things that were addressed in the movie regarding that. Yeah.
I mean, and so thinking about another sort of theme that really emerged clearly in the movie, but also as I witnessed the movement unfold, it's just very clear to me that women are organizing around a host of issues. Black Lives Matter movement, environmental justice, mass incarceration, immigration reform, the need for food security, and so much more. It makes me think about the history of Black women's activism and the intersecting fronts of the freedom fight that they really brilliantly detected. And I believe that we're seeing this sort of thought work in this renewed wave of the women's movement too. So I'm hoping that all of the panelists will sort of reflect on this and share your thoughts about this phenomenon.
I think something that's so interesting to me is how so much of that history, as we were hearing from the other panelists, has been eradicated. My children in school do, for Women's History Month and for Black History Month, at different times, they do these cereal boxes where they take a figure from history and they put their picture on it. And then on the side, they kind of list their accomplishments and their stuff they put on the back. And for both Black History Month and for Women's History Month, you have to really take a minute to think about, who is this character? If we said, White Male History Month, you'd think like all the founding fathers, and you'd think, Einstein, and you just could come up with a list very easily. I don't think I'm saying anything shocking. But when you try to think about who are those women's figures, you kind of have to do a little deep dive into who they are and what they did. And I do, because that's how I was brought up. And yet I will tell you, my younger children don't, because in our school system, they are very consciously now bringing a lot of these stories forward, so that there is a broader understanding of history and different pieces of it and different people that sort of made big impacts. And so I think that what I'd love to see from this is making sure that all these women, the women that were in this film, women that are kind of on the forefront of this movement now, that their stories are told now so that they won't be forgotten. That's why I love this documentary, to see that, because quite frankly, I didn't realize some of what was going on in the background. This has been a couple of years of just every month seems like something we never thought we'd see in our lifetime. So it just seems like every month we move forward in a new, a new issue. And I don't want some of what we saw in that documentary to get lost as we kind of move forward. So I think that's what some of these storytellers, why they're so important right now, to make sure that we're preserving those stories and they don't sort of get washed out as different people tell the story of our time.
I think we have to, when I watched the documentary, I thought about how you don't hear as much about these issues as you did at that point in time. And that we talk about whether all of this was a moment or whether it's a movement. And so it really made me think about whether it really is a movement, because it's not publicized in a way that it was in those particular moments. And there were several different moments. And so, the documentary very carefully and consciously put together all of the different movements, which I think was excellent. But now what? We're not hearing about it. There's not that groundswell. There's not that level of enthusiasm. So how do we get it back on the front page, if you will, so that people can continue to pay attention, so that we can have a repeat of 2018 with so many women going to Congress and so many women, or even more women, so that they can be placed in positions of decision making. So that some real structural change can occur as it relates to all women and women of color. The other point I wanted to raise is that, Black women have always led movements. And that there have been other women who have said that they have used the examples of these women to forge their own movements. And so I think that that is a lesson from history. I think that we should all understand. When we think of the Diane Nashes, for example, who were at the forefront of the civil rights movement, and that is one person a lot of people don't know about, Congresswoman Cheryl, that should be placed on a cereal box. And there are so many others. And I think that, you talk about what your children are learning in school, but that's in New Jersey. They're trying to take that away. And how do we prevent that? And I think is that we have to keep getting the headlines of these issues that are important. And so I'm going to look to you, Adriana, and making more documentaries so that more people will know that there is yet quite a bit of work to be done in this area to promote women and to promote women of color and trans women, and bring to light the issues that all of the various women face. And, as I said before, that even when you talk about women of color, we're not a monolith. Trans women and women, not a monolith. And so that everybody has their own unique perspectives, issues, and so forth that need to be brought to bear. And I think that we need to constantly keep it in the forefront and on the front page, if you will.
Yeah, and I think
so that we won't be talking about, soon to be Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson as some anomaly, as something that, that can only happen one time. There are a lot of women who are well qualified, Black women, Latinx women, trans women, who are well qualified to be justices of the Supreme Court. And I know that there are only 9 seats, but where else can they go? So I think that we have to constantly think about those things and work hard.
I think from my field point of view, I think that which I actually think has a huge amount of influence in society, like entertainment, right? Like just seeing somebody like Shonda Rhimes putting Black women and Black people at the forefront, gay people, like I feel like Lena White, all that starts creating a change. So the change has to come from different places, right? Like from the congresswoman's work with, the pay leave and all the stuff and the sexual harassment, from your work from our work in the entertainment industry. So that I think that is like sort of like the only way to keep the issue alive, because in a way I feel like, unfortunately, something like big needs to happen for the for our problems to become the forefront. You know what I mean? So like Donald Trump had to get elected for all this to happen, you know? But in the meantime, I hope that this came across in the movie, like a lot of the work had been done before that, you know, during the Obama administration was when the Black Lives Matter movement started, you know? And so I feel like, yes, we can't get complacent, but at the same time, I feel that on the ground, there's women and men, and there are people doing the work right now. And one last thing about that, I feel like one of the main things right now in terms of social change and how intersectional it is and how people are working together has to do with economic equality and capitalism. I feel like that is a way to unite people, because we live in a very unfair country in the sense, like, you know, like capitalism is making some people very rich and some people very poor. And all those very poor people are all races and all genders. So I feel like that is a place where they can be unity and maybe some progress can be made in just, you know, getting better salaries and, you know, benefits, universal health care, etc. But yeah.
You see, Adriana, you started off on the way down the path that I wanted to travel for our last topic before we invite the audience to join our conversation. And that is to sort of think about the theme of the film, Not Done, and to make some suggestions to our audience in terms of next steps, actions that they can take, frontiers of this fight that need to be considered and really kept central in our consciousness as we move forward. So, Not Done.
I think like, yeah, definitely Not Done. I think that following on the Congresswoman's work on maternal leave, I think like paternal leave would be also something that will help, you know, that also we need to work on, because just maternal leave is assuming that women are the only ones that are supposed to be taking care of the children, right? And in other societies, like in Sweden or whatever, you know, men are also part of it. And Gloria Steinem said one time that true equality will come when men and women are as really as involved and responsible in raising children as just women are right now. So I feel like that's like something that that needs to happen and that we could you know, work towards. How? I feel is grassroots. Most of it is grassroots, like find, you know, your college, your school board in your town, anything that where you can make a change. Even though it sounds small, it can create a huge impact in your community.
I personally don't think a school board is small. I think it's critical. And I think that you're absolutely correct that, you know, you have to be present at all levels. And especially now school is, you know, in the manner in which they're trying to change the way in which children are taught. I think that, you know, I think, and this is really hokey, but I think, you know, R.L. Sharp, you know, he said each of us are given a bag of tools, you know, and basically we can use them as a stumbling block or we can use it as a stepping stone. And, you know, and they all come with their own rules. And we understand that the same rules don't apply equally and definitely not equitably. And so I think that we have to be extremely vigilant, just like we have to run for every level of government or every level that governs something that controls our lives, that we also have to vote in the same way. We have to vote up ticket and down ticket, and educate people on a voting down ticket. I think that people who have been given certain privileges, like all of us on this panel, and probably most people who are listening in, that each one of us has a responsibility and an obligation to educate others and to keep these matters in the forefront and to push the needle as far as we can, to not be afraid, because we are kind of in a position where we don't necessarily have to be afraid to speak out on things that are unjust and that are not right and things that do not advance equity in our society. So I think that that's something that, people who are on this call should really give consideration to, what am I doing to advance equality and equity for all women? And what am I doing to educate others who don't get it, that this is what we need to be doing?
And I'd just say, kind of on the theme of representation matters, to have, one of the reasons I want to make sure women have that opportunity to work is because there's so many things where that representation matters. So Adriana was talking about how important entertainment is. When I was young, you basically only saw white people on television. And then it started to move into a space where you would have a Black couple. But they wouldn't be the main characters, but they would be, and that was kind of avant-garde. And then finally, you're getting to a point now where you have main characters who are Black, you have mixed couples, you're seeing representation in entertainment, and you're seeing gay couples, and you're seeing things that certainly we see here in New Jersey, but you're right, probably not, people don't see across the country as much, and kind of leading the way, which I think is important. But as far as kind of keeping in my lane a little bit, I just think it's so important to have women run for things, to have women running for school boards, to have women running for Congress, for president, to show that leadership. I'll tell you, when I first got in, I remember a friend of mine, Abigail Spanberger, was so offended because she had put out a tweet where, I don't know if it was the two of us or something. Everybody is fascinated by the subway in Congress that goes under the House and the Senate. So we had put out a little video. Here we are in the subway, because then, one of the number one questions I got when I first got into Congress was, have you been on the subway? So I'm like, here it is, the subway. And she immediately got some feedback that was basically like, Congress isn't a sorority. And I immediately said to her, no, it's a fraternity. That's what we're here to change, right? So to have people not automatically have this weird reaction to seeing women in Congress, like somehow we're just, not appropriately there, but to know that women can handle the job, and to be able as a woman, and this has really held a lot of women back, because people have a comfort level with women in leadership roles, we can then run authentically. So I was pretty lucky because I had this resume of a Navy helicopter pilot and a federal prosecutor. So then I could go talk to my community about what a debacle it was to have 20 kids in the soccer in one weekend, and how carpooling and getting to campaign events is, because what people want to know is, are you going to represent them? Are you going to have issues come before you? And are you going to kind of look at this issue in the way they might look at the issue? Because they know representation matters. And so we need to make sure women are there so that this country is comfortable with women's leadership, and place more women at the table. So, and before dessert. So I think that's really important.
Thank you all. Our audience has some questions, and actually questions that have a lot to do with strategizing moving forward. One audience member asked, and I'll read the question. Earlier in the meeting, you mentioned that inequality and oppression still largely exist, but that we have identified tools along the way. The experience of oppression for Black and Brown women is omnipresent and permeates all areas of our lives so that we are least likely to have the privilege to dedicate our limited resources and energy to lobby for change on a policy level. Considering this, can you give some examples of what these tools are, other than advocating for policy change, when it comes to economic equality, equal pay, leadership roles, et cetera? What is your experience in terms of strength and hope in breaking the concrete ceiling? That's one question that I'll put out there. And another audience question that I think you might be able to talk about at the same time is a question that asks, what are some of the strategies women leaders, organizations have going forward to build understanding around intersectionality? How do we bridge the generational divide? So, the first question essentially, if I can summarize, is really asking about, and I hope I'm summarizing it and capturing all that the question is asking. Aside from policy, how do we approach some of these pressing issues, right? Income inequality, et cetera. And the second question is asking about coalition building across generation and how we sort of facilitate an intersectional lens as we build movement work together.
I think one movement that we didn't talk too much about, and we in the movie only touched a little bit on it. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough running time. We were, because it's a PBS thing, we had to be a certain amount of time, but is the environment. So I feel like the movement for the environment is a place where there could be a lot of intersectionality and where people can bridge coalitions, because it's something that affects everyone. And I think that would be a good place to look at for intersectionality, in my opinion.
I really feel for the person that asked that first question, because I have always felt, as an American, you have to be engaged in your political system. In a democracy, that's your responsibility. And yet, quite frankly, when I had young children, it was all I could do to get through my day. I mean, there was no question that at the end of the day, I would somehow go to a library. I didn't have a babysitter. My parents weren't nearby. I wasn't going to be going to a library to attend a talk on our next big grassroots event. I wasn't going to be probably going to a fundraiser or going to knock on doors for my candidate. I was just going to be, trying to get some kids to the park before their nap and trying to feed them. And then, by the time they got to bed, I was probably going to go to bed too. So of course you have, sometimes the people that most need the help that our government can give to them are people that don't have the time. They're single parents. They have kids. They don't have a lot of money. They're not going to be giving the big donations and the calls and the stuff like that. So how do you get involved? And I think at this point, it's finding those people who are advocating for you. If there are grassroots groups, and just saying, look, I'm tapped out right now. I'm doing all I can to just do my job and raise my kids. But if there is something I could do to let you know what my struggle looks like, that would be a powerful story for you to then take back. Because the best advocacy I do is generally when I go on the floor of Congress or I go in my committee hearing and I say, you know what? I just talked to a woman who has this experience. And this is why it matters. And this is why this piece of legislation either is really important or is not going to work for her. So trying to find that person that can carry the weight for you. Because there are people that, like I said, they just don't have the capacity, but their voices have got to be heard. So finding that inroad to the people who are going to collect those stories and the grassroots groups that are going to carry those stories then to represent them to their members of Congress or others. I think that might help bridge that gap a little bit.
So, I have been thinking about that very serious question. I said, if I had the perfect answer, then I would be really, really famous. But as I think about it, there's so many different issues, so many different components of the issues that people face on so many different levels, so many different levels of intersectionality. And even with the common thread of environment, there's still multiple layers of that and how the environment affects different communities. And so I will confess, I am not sure how we get to that place. I do believe that there are people who have a great deal of influence, and a lot of them are in the entertainment industry. And I think that sometimes we can't wait for people to come to us, that we have to go out to the people, to where they are, to come in proximity, as Stevenson would say, come in proximity with the people in order to make some impact and some difference. And I think that, it's very difficult for people because there's such a multitude of issues to sort of prioritize, what's going to be the most important issue that we focus on now. But I think that if we could take 10, and if there's a commitment to ultimately, or within a specific time frame, to focus on and work on that particular issue, then I think that we would go a long way. But that is all really contingent upon, people getting together and gathering in the first place and agreeing to do even that. And so I don't have a real or perfect answer to that really good question. But it takes vigilance, it takes intentionality, and it takes people who are real influencers with money to sort of drive that.
Thank you. There are a couple of other questions, I think, in the chat, but we should be opening this conversation back up to Donna. I want to thank you all, Paulette and Adriana, Congresswoman Cheryl, thank you for participating in this conversation. The documentary was really amazing. I'd like to thank the audience for coming and being a part of this conversation, for witnessing and taking very seriously so many of the important things that we discussed today. And I'm looking forward to sharing space and keeping the conversation going moving forward, because we're not done. Donna?
Thank you. We're not done yet.
Not done yet.
I too echo your sentiments and appreciation to our panel, and also thank you, Dr. Cooper, for such thoughtful questions and moderating of an important issue. Really appreciate this. And so, this continues. Our Standing in Solidarity is an ongoing initiative that NJPAC is completely committed to. I'd like to really thank our corporate sponsors, PSEG, that make it possible for us to produce this monthly, and they have demonstrated an outstanding commitment to not only supporting Standing in Solidarity, but diversity, equity, and inclusion in many different organizations. I also would love to thank our women at NJPAC. Thank you so much for curating this amazing discussion and always making sure that when it's time to talk about women, that we really are able to address this in a very robust way. I just want to remind everyone that next month, our Standing in Solidarity topic will be Don't Silence Us, LGBTQ Youth Speak Out. So this will be on April 25th, and of course, you'll be getting information about that. And this Thursday, we have another social justice keynote address on reclaiming our birthright, freedom, dreams of joy and healing. All of this information will be on our website. Please come and support. We also have Urban Bushwomen on April 1st and 2nd. We're going to have a panel discussion to talk about Black hairstyles and what all of that means and how do we translate this. So we're exploring, how do we engage ourselves in our society and community and educating our constituents at the same time. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.